Welcome back to So You Really Want to Learn Latin, and today we are going to look at Latin verse and how Latin verse is scanned. Now, Roman authors spent an awful lot of their time imitating Greek authors. You know, the Romans were obsessed with the Greek world, and rightly so. It was an amazing culture. But the great Roman poets, you know, you'll be familiar with Virgil and Horace and Ovid and Catullus. All of these great writers owed an enormous debt to the Greek poets, and yet they slightly adapted what they found in Greek. In some ways, because the Latin language was, you know, obviously different to the Greek, but in other regards, they just kind of wanted to put a spin on it, you know, because they wanted to make it their own, as those game shows would say. But first things first, all of this is covered in chapter 10. We're going to be on page kind of 102 and 103 if you're following the course. But first we're going to need to work out what we mean by scanning a line of Latin poetry. What does scanning mean? Well, the first thing you need to know is that Latin verse, just like the Greek verse that preceded it, is based not on stress, but on quantity. Okay, the quantity of the syllable. Now, English verse is typically dependent on stress. So the old brown cow sat on the whatever that thing is, I can't remember how it goes. But we're stressing syllables in English. And that's how, you know, typically English poetry, certainly English poetry that follows any kind of metre, is based on the stress that we put on the syllables. Latin and Greek verse were different. They depended not on the stress, but on the length of the syllable. Now, the length of a syllable is determined by the length of the vowel within the syllable. And there are rules that we're going to learn for showing you how you can determine the length of a vowel. And those rules really are kind of split into whether a vowel is long by nature, and some vowels are just long. You know, the vowel is long, you have to pronounce it as a long vowel because it is a long vowel. You know, like the O at the end of amo, that O is a long O. It's not amo, it's amo. And the Latin word for table, mensa, that E is a long E. It was pronounced E. It wasn't mensa, mensa. It's a long E. Okay, so some vowels are long by nature, and you just pronounce them as long. Some vowels are long by position, and we will learn how to determine whether a vowel is long by position. Okay, so the syllable that the vowel is in, the syllable, will either be long or short. Okay, and lines of Latin poetry are made up of syllables, long or short, in a particular pattern. And the first pattern that we're going to learn, which is the most important, the most common, is the hexameter line. Right, now a hexameter line is made up of 6 feet. Now, a foot in poetry is a measure of words, a combination of syllables put together into a thing called a foot. And a hexameter line has 6 feet. Okay, and those feet are made up either of dactyls. Okay, a dactyl is a measure made up of a long syllable followed by 2 short. Okay, da-diddy. Okay? You often hear people going da-diddy-da-da. Well, da-diddy is a dactyl, so a long syllable followed by two short ones, or a spondee, which is two long syllables. Okay, so a hexameter line is made up of 6 feet using a combination of dactyls and spondees, and just to be tricky, the final syllable in a hexameter line can also be something called a trochee. And a trochee is a measure, it's a foot made up of a long syllable followed by one short rather than two shorts. Da-di. Okay? That can only be used at the end of a hexameter line, never kind of earlier in the line. Okay, so we've got dactyls and we've got spondees, and we're going to kind of merge them together into a pretty little pattern, which for the hexameter line could look like this. Okay, now what we're seeing here is the possible pattern of dactyls and spondees that make up a hexameter line. And you'll see that the first 4 feet can be either dactyls or spondees. Okay, it can either go da-diddy, 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 da-diddy as the first 4 feet, or it can go da-da, 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 okay, or any combination of that. So for example, da-diddy-da-da, da-diddy-da-da, or da-da-da-diddy-da-da-da-diddy, or da-diddy-da-diddy-da-diddy-da-da. So a hexameter line, we know, can be made up of a combination of these dactyls and spondees, the da-diddy-da-da. In any kind of weird combination, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-diddy, da-diddy-da-da, or da-diddy-da-diddy-da-diddy-da-diddy-da-diddy-da-da. Okay, according to this pattern, which is sort of laid down in stone, used by the great epic poets, principally Homer in Greek and Virgil in Latin, and people who imitate them. And once you know the pattern of a hexameter line, you kind of know how the poetry will sound, because it will fit into this pattern. Okay, so first of all, you need to learn that hexameter lines are made up of 6 feet, and that they can begin, the first 4 feet can be either dactyls or spondees, okay, any combination of those, and then the 5th foot will always be a dactyl, da-diddy, and the final foot will always either be a spondee, da-da, or this thing called a trochee, which is da-di. And that's how the line will always finish, and it'll begin with a combination of the da-diddies or the da-das. Okay. Now, what we therefore need to know is, how do you know if it's a dactyl or a spondee? What is the basis on which we decide it's da-di-di or it's da-da? How do you know? Well, to get that right, there are some basic principles we need to learn. And probably the best thing to do is start with a line of Latin poetry. Okay, line 1 of book 1 of Virgil's Aeneid, very famous line for obvious reasons, is arma virumque cano Troiae qui primus aboris. Okay, so that is the first line of the Aeneid. And if we write it out, we can mark it, it's called scanning it, with its syllables marked as either long or short, and we divide the line into its 6 feet with little vertical lines. And it's very, very similar to music fitting into bars. Okay, the musicians among you will know that a bar, will be made up of a combination of, crotchets and all these other funny things that musicians talk about. And Latin poetry is the same. The feet are like musical bars. Okay, think of it in those terms, if that helps. And when you see it scanned like that and marked, you'll notice that we number the feet from 1 to 6, and they, are marked off with these vertical lines. And within the vertical lines, the foot itself, you can see that we've marked the syllables as either long or short, and therefore we've filled our little divisions, our feet, we've filled those feet either with dactyls or with spondees. So they're either dar-diddies or they're dar-dars. Okay? Now, to get those feet correct, we need to know whether the syllable is long or short. Okay? And remember, it's the syllable we are marking. Although we put our little mark over the top of a vowel, it's the syllable we're marking rather than specifically the vowel. Okay? And that's a kind of principle you need to be aware of. That becomes important. Now, there are 4 basic little kind of guidelines that will help this enormously. Number 1, a syllable will be long if it contains either a long vowel or a diphthong. Okay, the syllable will be long if it contains a long vowel or a diphthong. And that is because it kind of takes longer to pronounce a long vowel, amo, than a short one, ego. Okay? So the syllable is lengthened by virtue of the fact there's a long vowel noise to get through, or a diphthong, which is a very long vowel sound to get through. Okay? Well, it's not very long, but it's as long as a long vowel. It's a long noise. So a syllable will be long if it contains a long vowel or a diphthong. Now the second thing is that a syllable will almost always be long if it contains a vowel followed by 2 consonants. Okay, and those 2 consonants need not be part of the same word. They can be, one at the end of the word and the next beginning the new word, or they can even be both beginning the new word. But the point is a vowel sound, which then has to be followed by you getting your teeth around 2 consonants, like st or dr, that lengthens the syllable. So just for example, looking at that line of Virgil, the first word, the Latin for weapons, arma, the first A in that word, it's actually a short A, but it's really hard to pronounce it as a short A because it's followed by the R and the M, which drag the syllable length out. Now, if you can, you should pronounce that first A as a kind of noise, like cup, arma. But, in other words, it's not arma, it's arma. But the syllable is long because having got through your short A noise, you're then r and m in. And that lengthens out the syllable. Now the third thing to notice is that a vowel followed immediately by another vowel, which is not creating a diphthong, where that happens, the first of the 2 vowels will be short. Okay? And that also applies if it's a vowel followed by an H, by the way. So a vowel followed by another vowel or an H, which do not form a diphthong, the first vowel will be short. So the Latin for my is meus. Okay, meus. The E is short because it's followed by a U, but that's not a diphthong. It's not muse, it's meus. okay? And the Latin for I drag is traho. Now, the A of traho is short because it's followed by an H, okay? So that's a really handy little trick. Two vowels together, or a vowel with an H, the first vowel will be short. And then the fourth principle, really important one, this, is to do with elision. So in Latin, where a word ends in a vowel or a vowel followed by an M, the letter M, and the next word begins with a vowel or the letter H, right? Where that happens, you get elision. And what that means is that the vowel sound at the end of the first word elides into the new word, okay? Now, in English, we kind of elide when we say don't rather than do not, or can't rather than cannot. That kind of squishing is a form of elision. And in Latin, what happens when you elide, for the purposes of scansion, you kind of pretend the syllable didn't exist at all. And the way we mark that is we put brackets around it, you know, as if to say, do not bother with this syllable at all because it's barely there. We're going to elide it right into the next word, and, you know, by the time we've done that, it's almost disappeared. Okay? Now, book 2 of Virgil's Aeneid begins with the phrase contiquere omnes. Now, what's going on there, I haven't explained why contiquere is in fact a third person plural of a perfect tense, but, you know, we will get to that, I promise. But meanwhile, it ends with an E, contiquere. And the next word begins with an O, omnes. So the E of contiquere elides, we put brackets around it, and we say ignore it. And it'll elide, contiquere omnes. You don't really pronounce it as a separate syllable. That is called elision, really important. Okay, so the only way to make any kind of sense of anything that I've said so far is to actually put it into practice. Okay, so we're going to start with, whoopsie, we're working, as you probably know, right at the end of this course. We're in chapter 10, we're on page 103, 104, 105. But I'm going to grab a line. It's a line from book 2 of Virgil's Aeneid. I remember this because when I was at school, my O-level Latin, this was one of the kind of the sections began with this line. Tempus erat quo prima quies mortalibus aegris. Okay, right. Don't worry what it means. It's just a slab of Latin. It's a line of Latin from the Aeneid. It is therefore a hexameter line. And remember, a hexameter line is made up of 6 feet, and those feet are made up of a combination of dactyls and spondees, and because it's a hexameter line, we know that the last 2 feet will be made up of a dactyl followed by either a spondee or a trochee. A da, di, di, da, da, or a da, di, di, da, di. Okay, that's how it will end. Okay, but how do we scan it? Well, there are, how many? There are 8 little steps to follow. So let's see if we can follow the 8 steps. They're all laid out on page 104 if you want to follow this. But we will begin by looking at our line. Now, I have scribbled it down in this little book here, so I can do this while you're going along. We start by looking for elision. Is there any elision? Right, tempus erat quo prima quies mortalibus aegris. Do any of those syllables at the end of words elide? They will only do so if they end in a vowel or an M, followed by a word that begins with a vowel or an H. Now, if you look, although quo ends in a vowel, the next word does not begin with a vowel or an H. Prima ends in a vowel, but the next word does not begin with a vowel or an H. Quies mortalibus. So no elision. Okay? Right, number 1, no elision. Okay, step number 2, look for any diphthongs and mark them as long. So they're pretty easy to spot. Tempus erat quo, prima quies mortalibus. I grease. Okay, so the AE of I grease means weary, I get. Okay, so we can mark that. Right, step number 3, look for syllables containing vowels which are followed by 2 or more consonants and mark those syllables as long. Right, so just work your way along. The first E in tempus, look at that, it's followed by an M and a P, so mark it as long. Tempus, no, now, erat, okay. Now the word is short, erat, short A, but the A is followed by a T and then the Q of quo. So that must be a long syllable. Okay, so we mark the A as long. What else have we got? Prima, no, quit, no. Now look at quies mortalibus. The E of quies is followed by the S of quies and then the M of mortalibus. So it's a vowel followed by 2 consonants. We mark it as long. Okay, then the O of mortalibus. Okay. Now that O is followed by an R and a T, so it must be long. We mark it as long. Mortalibus. Then we got R, no, don't know, and then that's it dealt with. Okay, so that's helped us along a bit. Right, what do we do next? Step number 5, do the last 5 syllables. Now we do the last 5 syllables, we could have done this first actually, because we know it ends da diddy da da or da diddy da di. We know that because that's how hexameter lines work. So it's kind of easier really if you work backwards. Nail the last foot, which is 2 syllables. It's either da da or da di. And we've got, well, we've already marked the AE as a long, so it's I, and then the last syllable, it's either I grease or it's I gris. Okay, so we can finish it off, and as I finish a foot, in other words, I know that I've got either my dactyl or my spondee in it, I then mark the vertical line to say that foot is nailed. Okay, so the final foot of this hexameter line is the word I grease. Now we happen to know from our grammar that dative plurals end is, not is. We're completely comfortable just marking it as long, I grease. But we can then now do the 3 syllables before I grease because we know that they are a dactyl, da, di, di. So we know it's arlibus, da, di, di. That we can mark even if we didn't know how to pronounce those words because it must be a dactyl. Okay? Now, we mark the da and the di and the di, and then we put our vertical line, so feet 5 and 6 are now dealt with. We can put a 5 and a 6 over the top, they're dealt with. Okay, now what else do we have? Step number 6, mark the quantity of any syllables which from your knowledge of grammar you know to be either long or short. Okay, now when we learn our Latin grammar, when we learn how to conjugate our verbs and decline our nouns, we try really hard to pronounce them correctly because the length of a vowel, which is long grammatically or short grammatically, will help when we scan our poetry. So, for example, we know that the Latin for I love is amor, and that O is a long O. Grammatically, it's long, okay? Whereas the Latin for I is ego, and grammatically that O is short. So, knowing that helps. It helps if you know what the words are in the sentence and grammatically you're comfortable that it's a nominative or an ablative or whatever. Of course, if you don't yet know that because you haven't translated it, it's a bit harder. So I'm not going to make a big thing about this at this stage because we've only got a bit of the sentence here and some of these words are not familiar to us, so grammatically we don't really know what we're doing if we're honest. But in principle, it helped us with I grease. That was a dative. It's not I grist, but again, it's a word you didn't know, so maybe you didn't know anyway. So let's just assume that if there were any words here which grammatically had to be either long or short, we could have got them right at this stage. And just to give you a clue, there is one here. That word prima. Grammatically, it must be, the A is either long or short from a grammatical point of view. But because we haven't translated it, I'm not going to, in a sense, cheat by marking that, because at this point we don't know. Okay, now what you can do is kind of join the dots. Finish off feet, which by a process of elimination must be kind of either dactyls or spondees. Now, the easy thing to remember here is that a short syllable, ignoring the one at the very end of the line, which we can ignore, a short syllable anywhere else in the line must come in a kind of pair with another short syllable, because a dactyl is da, di, di, and a spondee is da, da. So if you ever see a di, you know that there is another di, either before it or after it. Has to be. Okay, now if we look at the end of this sentence, we know that the last 2 feet go da, di, di, da, da. And if we look at the word mortalibus, we know that the O of mortalibus is long. We've already marked that because it's an O followed by 2 consonants. Okay. Now, because that long syllable is at the end of a foot, right, there's a division immediately after it, we absolutely know that the syllable before it must also be long, because you can't have a foot that goes short long. That's not a thing that can happen in a hexameter line. Therefore, the ace of ace must have been long, must have been, even if we didn't kind of know how to pronounce the word. Okay, now by creating that division, we've now nailed foot number 4. We've got da, 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 di, di, da, da as the end of this line. Now, quit ace. Okay, so immediately in front of mortalibus, we've got quit ace. Okay, now it's quit ace. So the I is short because it's a vowel followed by another vowel, not diphthong, not a diphthong. So that we have marked as short, okay? And if que ace, so if the que is short, and we know that the syllable after it is long, because we've just marked it, then the syllable before the que must also be short, because shorts come in pairs, okay? So that deals with the of prima. Now, I did say that grammatically it had to be something, and I know it's a nominative feminine singular, but you know, if you didn't know that earlier, you do know it now because we've just marked it as a short a. So it must be nominative or vocative. But okay, now if the of prima is short, and we know that the que of quies is short, by definition the syllable immediately before the a of prima must be long to create a dactyl. Okay, you can't get 3 short syllables in a row in a hexameter line, so it must be prima que. So we can mark that, and that finishes off our third foot. We can put a 3 over the top. Okay, so do you see what's happening? We've gone by kind of a process of elimination. We've worked out what some of these syllables must be just to fit the dactyl and the spondee arrangement. Okay, now we know that the front end of this sentence contains 2 feet. We've only got 2 feet left. We don't know if it's 2 dactyls, 2 spondees, a dactyl and a spondee and a dactyl. We don't yet know. However, we sort of do, because if you look at now what's coming at the end of our second foot, that word quo is a long syllable. Therefore, because it's at the end of the foot, the syllable in front of it must also be long. Okay? It couldn't go short, long, and then end of a foot. It's got to go long, long, end of a foot. So that means the at of erat, the syllable is long. Okay? And, you know, we had already marked that actually because A followed by T followed by Q, it's long. So we've got that anyway. Erat quo. Okay, so if our second foot is a spondee, erat quo, then that just means the only thing left is the first foot. And how many syllables have we got? We've got tempus e. There are 3 syllables and it can only be 1 foot. Therefore, by definition, that is a dactyl. It couldn't begin with a spondee, because then if it did begin with a spondee, you'd then have to mark a line and you'd be left with a syllable that didn't fit into any of the feet. So it is definitely a dactyl at the beginning, tempus e. And you know, you might have said to yourself, well, I knew that anyway, because the word is tempus, it's not tempus, and the word is erat, it's not erat. So kind of some of this works just through common sense and a kind of natural way of pronouncing the Latin the way you would want to pronounce it anyway. And sometimes it's a bit harder. But here we go, we've finished it off. We can mark off our 2 over the top of the second foot and our 1 over the top of the first foot. And there we have it. Tempus erat quo prima quies mortalibus aegris. Okay? Right, now, there's lots more to do on this. Next time I'm going to show you what I mean by a caesura. I'm going to talk about some of the exceptions that occur when we're following these rules. And we are going to have a go at scanning some more lines of poetry. Okay, but until then, go back and have a read of the rules on pages sort of 102 and 103 and 104. And I'll see you back here on this channel very soon.